Machiavelli, an Italian philosopher who has had a great impact on the world through his ideas. Born in 1469 and died in 1527, Machiavelli's ideas remain relevant even today and will continue to do so in the future. So let's look at what exactly was his ideas and who he was. So Machiavelli is referred to as the father of political realism. So political realism basically is the way of looking at things, the political sphere, in the way it is and not how it's supposed to be. So usually in our discussions, we talk about how a democracy is supposed to be about the people. It's supposed to be about serving the people and uplifting the depressed classes and so on and so forth. But realism does not talk like this. Realism talks about what the truth is. So while we say, okay, democracy is supposed to be like this, realism says no, democracy is supposed to be like that, supposed to be like this is not important. What is important is how it is. And how it is that out here there is a struggle for power. More than serving the people, people are here struggling for power, you know, through their propaganda, through their campaigns. And that is the reality. And we have to deal with the situations, keeping in mind what the reality is. And basically, that's realism. It's not a very complicated concept. It basically means seeing the world as it is and not through our lens of what we wish the world was. Now, Machiavelli is also seen as a transition from medieval to modern thought. Some scholars disagree with this view, but many scholars agree with this view. And why is he seen as a transition from medieval to modern thought? You see, before Machiavelli, most of the thinkers spoke about ethics and what is the right thing for the rulers and the kings to do. Most philosophers, political philosophers, spoke about what the kings should do for their people and so on. And most of them would talk about morality and duty of the king. But Machiavelli takes a very different stance, and we will see what those stance are. And because of his stance, he's seen as a transitional thinker. And one of the things that he did was separated religion and ethics from politics. He said that politics is totally different. Don't look at politics through the lens of religion. What does he mean by this? So basically, let's say if a religious text says that the ruler should be kind, the ruler should be compassionate, the ruler should work for the welfare of his or her people. Now, when people are judging politics through that lens, and if the ruler is cruel, they will say this is a bad ruler because religion says he should be kind, but he's not kind. And Machiavelli comes and says, well, you can't use religion or ethics to judge politics. Politics is a separate thing in itself. So remove this religious lens to look at politics, and we will discuss more about that in detail. His ideas are so controversial that his name has been used to describe evil. Many people use the term Machiavellism to describe something that is evil actions or cunning deeds of people. But despite the controversy he had to face during his lifetime and after his death, he remains one of the most relevant and most followed thinker even today. Some people even related him to the devil, to Satan, saying that he was a child of the devil and so on because of his ideas. The Prince is perhaps his most well-known work. He has many works throughout his life, but this work, The Prince, is the most well-known and the most well-read work of Machiavelli. He dedicated this book. The Prince was a book that was dedicated to Lorenzo II of the Medici family. This was a ruling class in Florence, a ruling family in Florence, to whom he had given suggestions in this book that how you must rule. And before we get into the contents of the book, let's see a brief life sketch. Because whenever you study a philosopher, remember it is important for you to know where they were born, what kind of an environment they lived in. Because philosophers are a product of his or her time. This is a statement you must always remember. Any philosopher that is giving a philosophy is influenced by what he or she is seeing around him, and their thinking and their beliefs are shaped by that, and that's why a philosopher is called a product of his time, and Machiavelli is no exception to that. So he was born in Florence, and Renaissance is a very great chapter in humanity's history. because this was the time when humanity began to question things. And this happened in Europe, but it has impacted the entire world. So basically, in Renaissance, there were many things, but what you need to know for this video is that this was a time when people began to question the beliefs. So you see, when religion would control people's life and say, well, this is how you must live, if you drink, if you smoke, if you accumulate wealth, it is bad and God will punish you. You see, all these things, different religions tell such things and try to keep people in control. Now, during the Renaissance, people started to question it. They said that, well, why is it a bad thing? We are ready to accept whether it's good or bad, but give us a reasoning. You cannot come and say, well, God said it, and thus you must believe in it. Do you know the church at that time used to sell a ticket to heaven? And this is not a joke. So the church would say, if you have done sins in your life, come to the church, pay us some money, and we will help you get to heaven. So this was deep rooted corruption that was taking place, and people began to question it during this time. This was also a time of science, when people began to see that the world we have known till now is not the real one. The real world is discovered through science. And so reasoning and critical thinking came into people. And Machiavelli was born during this time, so naturally he questioned the belief that was there before him. The place where he was born and worked in, that is Florence, it was a very prosperous region. But unfortunately, it was a region of chaos. It was unstable politically. Sometimes there was a monarchy, sometimes there was a republican form of government. Republican form of government is a little different from democracy, but for the purpose of simplicity, you can understand it as being democracy itself. And if you see, one of the movements and that was going on in the Italian region was the talk for Italian unification. Italy as a nation today that we see did not exist back then. There was a phase when the Italian unification took place, after which the Italy we see today came into existence. Before that, they were divided into small, different kingdoms and regions. And Machiavelli had this burning desire of unification of Italy, and he dedicated a lot of his works and you can say influences on his work was because of this desire to see Italy as one country someday. So let's get into his ideas. One of the ways you can understand somebody's ideas is to understand how they look at human beings. Every thinker has a certain perception of a human being in their mind. Some have a good perception, some think that human beings are good and they can sacrifice for others, they are caring and loving, while some others think that uh, human beings are selfish and greedy. Machiavelli is one of them. He has a pessimistic view of humans. So he believed that humans were selfish, egoistic, greedy, ungrateful, that whatever you do for them, they would be ungrateful. They would want more. And so when you're dealing with human beings, you must keep these things in mind. And he said that a human being can do good to you only under two conditions. One is when they expect benefits from you. So he was trying to tell, if somebody is acting good to you out of a blue, don't think they have had a change in heart. Because according to Machiavelli, they are being good to you only because they think you can benefit them. And the second condition in which they can be good to you is under compulsion. Let's say you're somebody very powerful and they have no other option but to be good to you because they know you're powerful enough and you can hurt them if you're not good to them. And so he's saying when people expect benefits from you or under compulsion is the only time that a human being will be good to you. And he has this quote, which is basically his belief that revenge is a very powerful emotion. And he says, a man can forget the murder of his father, but not the loss of his property. And this view of his is very important when we see his views on statecraft, which we'll discuss towards the end, because he uses this view to advise the king as to what the king must avoid at all times. So Machiavelli's one of the revolutionary ideas was separating religion from politics. He contributed greatly to the secularization of politics. Today, it is a very common thing for politics and religion to be separate. But at that time, remember, the church used to decide the day-to-day life of the people. The king and the rulers used to get the legitimacy from the church, and so church was not just a religious authority, but church was also a political authority. without whose blessings kings and leaders had a very hard time surviving. And he believed that politics is autonomous and does not need religious justification. So understand the historical context of this. Most of the kings and queens and whichever ruler that came, be it in Europe, be it in India, be it in anywhere around the world, one of the ways that they would strengthen the rule was to keep the priestly class, be it the popes, be it the pandits, be it the Maulvis, and these priestly class would create a justification for the rule. So they would say, well, this king has been sent by God, and if you oppose the king means you're opposing God. So you must obey the king just like how you obey God, and so on and so forth. And people were very deeply religious, and so they use these tools to actually, create justification for the rulers. And Machiavelli said that this is not needed. Politics is autonomous, and for politics to survive, for rulers to survive, you don't need religious justification. There are other ways you can, justify your politics, your leadership. And one of the reasons he hated, or you can say disliked, the church was because he felt it was preventing Italian unification. And the other was corruption of church. As I said you that church was selling a ticket to heaven, and there were many things. Church was regulating day-to-day life of the people, and from everywhere they were squeezing out as much money they can from people. The priestly class was living a lavish life. When you dedicate your life to God as a priest, as a pandit, as a Maulvi, as any religious figure, you cannot have a lavish life. Your life must be that of a simple person. If you are yourself having a lavish life, you are consumed by material greed, how are you going to guide people to spirituality? And at that time, corruption had become very prevalent in the church. And he and many thinkers at that time and many people began to realize this and question this. And he said that religion should not interfere in politics. Religion has nothing to do with politics. So religion should not dictate what the ruler must do and what the ruler must not do. But even though he had this dislike for religion, he did not believe that religion was useless. Remember, he's a realist. Realist will use any means to achieve what the goal is. So he said to the ruler, he urged that even if you don't believe in religion, use religion as a tool to discipline people. To discipline people, for example, saying that if you rebel against the state, it is religiously a sin, you might go to hell, and so on. Create a fear that if you do something wrong, you might go to hell. If you do something right, you will go to heaven. And this way you could discipline the people to do as you like them to do. And so he had openly advised the rulers that don't be guided by religion, but use religion as a weapon for your rule. And if someone opposes you and you have to take action against them, you can again use religion. So we see even today, in the name of religion, people are killed, people are suppressed. And he's advising that to the rulers that if you have to use religion as a weapon against those opposes you, then go ahead, don't hesitate to use it. But while you're using religion, make sure you use religion, and religion should not use you. Religion should just be a tool in your hand, and it should not become your guiding light. Politics and ethics. So the traditional sense of ethics that ethical ruler is always kind to his subjects, and by subjects you mean the people he or she is ruling over. And he said this traditional perspective of ethics has no place in politics. Politics does not need any explanation or justification from outside. And this is where his realism comes into play. He says realism, there's a very easy formula to understand what realism. Realism is basically what is and not what ought to be. So what is present here and how you can navigate this situation is what matters, and not what it should have been or not what else you could have done. So don't think into the future or what ifs and this and that. Think about what is right now and how you can navigate the situation. And he says, why does he say that politics does not need explanation or justification? Because he says politics is all about a struggle for power. You are doing politics because you need power. How can you then bring religion and ethics into it to judge whether your politics is right or not? And he says that politics has its own morality, its own judgment criteria. What is the judgment criteria? So raison d'etre of state. So reason for existence of state. There are three reasons: protection of life and property, preservation of state, fulfilling national interest. By fulfilling national interest, he means expand or perish. So he says the reason why the state exists first is to protect the life of the people and the property of the people. So if you own a land, someone should not just come and snatch it. It should be the state that protects that property. Someone should not just be able to come and kill you. The state should protect your life. Preservation of state. So now, if the state has to protect your life, if it has to protect your property, it needs to exist. To exist, you must do things that ensure that the state is stable and it is preserved. So you must make policies that, in the long-term interest, uh, strengthen the state. And the third is fulfill national interest. So by national interest, Machiavelli believed that if a state does not expand, which is capture more territory, grow more in economy, then the state will sooner or later collapse. So, and he says, if these three parameters are being achieved by a ruler, then that ruler does not need any justification. The ruler might have killed 1,000 people to achieve these, but if these three have been achieved, it does not matter. The ruler is doing the right thing. But before, according to religion, according to ethics, the ruler would have been seen as a bad person for killing thousands of people. But now he has achieved these three: protection of life and property, preservation of state, and fulfilling national interest. And no matter what tools he or she used to achieve this, everything is justified. So this is one of the reasons why Machiavelli was seen as evil. That you are telling the ruler that you can kill people, you can do whatever you want to your subjects as long as you're fulfilling these three criteria. And this is the only judgment criteria to see whether you're a good ruler or bad ruler. And this is one of the most controversial ideas he has given. But if you see, this is the reality. People forget if the ruler was good or bad, if the ruler was able to achieve, let's say, economic progress, if the ruler was able to make the country stronger. People forget their bad deeds mostly. And that's why he's called a realist. And he gives the concept of dual morality. Now, usually we hear people say, don't change your colors, it's a bad thing, be who you are, don't pretend to be somebody else. Machiavelli says, no, all this is complete nonsense. Have dual morality. Change your morality when it's needed, change your colors when it's needed, change according to the situation. You don't always have to be good or always have to be bad. Most people are in this, most rulers, and it applies to the individuals as well, are in this situation most of the time where they are wondering that is this the right thing to do, is this the wrong thing to do. But Machiavelli would tell you that the right or wrong thing will be judged based on what your goal is. Let's say, for example, your goal is to pass an exam. Now, usually you would think, well, cheating is not a good thing to do. I should prepare for the exam. Machiavelli will come and tell you, well, you have to pass the exam. That's what matters. Whether you cheat or you do it by studying, it will not matter in the end if you're passing the exam. And he says this to the ruler too. If if let's say you have to ensure stability, and now you are not sure whether it's good enough to kill so many people. Let's say there are 10,000 people protesting, and now you have to maintain stability, and the ruler's only option is to kill the people. Machiavelli's advice is go ahead and do that. If you know this is how stability will come in the country, don't hesitate. I'm just giving an example. Of course, Machiavelli didn't go and say kill 10,000 people, but what I'm telling you is to the extent which Machiavelli has gone. He said do anything that you need to do to achieve the goals. And that's why dual morality. Views on statecraft. So before we see his views on statecraft, let's understand what statecraft actually is. Statecraft is basically formulating and execution of policy. So we see governments come up with policies, they have discussions and debates, and then they come with a policy that, for example, new education policy. The Indian government a few years ago come with that. So they formulated the policy and then they implemented it, they executed it. They passed the bill and they went ahead, ordered all the government officers and all to and colleges to implement all these policies. So that is basically statecraft, and it has to achieve national interest. So you're making a policy and implementing it to achieve national interest. That's a very simple definition of what statecraft is. This is a definition given by Morton Kaplan. Now, Machiavelli has two distinctions of statecraft. One is internal, which is domestic. So his advice on what should be the internal criteria for carrying of statecraft. So first he says, do it make your policies based on human nature. So remember, we discussed the pessimistic view of human nature, that he believed humans are selfish, greedy, and so on and so forth. So if Machiavelli was the ruler, then his advice to himself would be that, remember, when you're making the policy, people are greedy, people are ungrateful, people are egoistic. So make your policy according to that, satisfy that ego, satisfy that greed, and also make sure you keep that in control as well. It should not go out of control. So he says, when you're making policy, see the human nature of people. How are people? Don't just make a policy because you think this is the right thing or the wrong thing. When you're making a policy, make sure to try to analyze how the people might respond to it. And his advice to the ruler is that in the domestic sphere, be feared or be loved. If you can be both, well, then that's very good. But be feared or loved, but not hated. You know, Hatred, if your people hate you, then your days are numbered. So he says, you be feared or be loved, but not hated by the people. And he says, use resort force as your last resort. So while yes, he has said you can use any means, he cautions the ruler and he says, just because you can use any means doesn't necessarily have to be that you'll use force every time. Use force when there is no other option. But if you use force, once let's say you have tried all other means, you have tried talking to the people, you have tried, you know, giving compensation, but nothing is working, then use force. But if you're using force, destroy the enemy completely. Completely eliminate them. Don't, hurt them a little bit and then leave them. Because remember, he believes revenge is a powerful emotion. So if you're going to hurt them, destroy them completely so that they can't get back up and take revenge on you. Because if they can take revenge on you, your days are numbered. So use force as a last resort, but once you use it, destroy the enemy and stay blameless. So, for example, you're a ruler. So, his advice to you would be that, let's say you need to carry out violence. Now, don't let the blame come on you. Don't come out in the public and say, I ordered to go and do lathi charge on these people or go and do open fire on these people. You should not do it. Send somebody else. Send a general, send somebody on your behalf to do it, but make sure the blame doesn't come on you. And let's say you have sent somebody to carry out the violence for you, and now people are angry. Machiavelli would say that blame that person, even though you have sent him, even though you have sent him to do this work for you, blame him, and if needed, kill him also, to make sure the people think that, well, you know, the ruler was not the bad one, this person was the bad one, and the ruler did justice by killing him. So Machiavelli is this dual morality concept and his separation of ethics from politics can be seen clearly here, and you can see why people would criticize him for it. And other advices he gave, he said that never lust for the property of woman of your subject. Remember, he said that people can forget the murder of their father, but not the loss of their property. So he said, never try to take away the property of women of your subjects. Leave these things untouched. Because remember, humans are greedy, they are egoistic, they are ungrateful, and revenge is a powerful emotion. If you try to hurt their ego, if you try to take away what is theirs, then they will come for you someday. And respect the customs and traditions of the people. Use religion to your advantage, even if you don't believe it. So you might not believe in religion. Let's say you believe in Machiavelli's teaching, and Machiavelli said religion should have nothing to do with politics. But this doesn't mean that you start disrespecting religion or customs or traditions, because that will make the people angry. So don't do that. Respect people's customs, respect people's traditions, and use religion to your advantage. And dual morality, as we discussed, change color when you need it. And tackle corruption. Corruption was a problem that Machiavelli could see around him. He was in the government himself, and the church was corrupt, as we discussed. And even today, corruption is a big problem. And he said the rulers to tackle corruption with strong laws, by using violence, by making people virtuous. So strong laws and violence is one thing, but this can't prevent corruption. There are strong laws everywhere in the many countries in the world, but corruption is still prevalent over there. So he says make people virtuous. From a very childhood, educate them in a way that they are better people, they are honest people. They are not all greedy and corrupt people. So these are his advices on how the internal statecraft must. His advice for external statecraft, which is basically how your foreign policy should be, is that you must follow an imperialist foreign policy. So basically, what he means by this is that you must always look to expand your land, your size of economy, your sphere of influence, because if you don't do this, you will collapse. So always look to expand. And he says the king must be a skillful diplomat. So this king must be able to negotiate with other rulers and other leaders well. Form judicious alliance. So make alliances that help you in case you go into a war. And if you were to win, make sure you get maximum gains. Your alliance should be in a way that you are the one that gets the maximum gains. But if you're going to lose the war, for example, then your damage should be minimum. So this is his advice. And he says use extensive spy system. Have spies all around, be it in your country, be it in different countries, to understand what is the mood of that country, what that country is planning, and make your decisions accordingly. He also gives advice that people must have, the country must have their own army, citizen army. Florence didn't have a citizen army. So, like you have the Wagner group in Russia today, a kind of a private militia group. Florence had that kind of a group back then, and Machiavelli didn't like it. And so he advises citizen army, like for example, how the Indian army is. So he advised to the ruler that you must have a citizen army if you want to actually be a strong country. And he also said avoid war as long as possible. So even though he was advising the ruler to expand, he said you don't always have to keep fighting war. Avoid war as long as possible, but when it comes to that, don't hesitate to fight. And when you conquer a certain territory, let's say you have fought a war and now you have conquered the territory, respect the customs and traditions of the people. For example, if you see when the British came to India and they conquered the territory of India, they had little regard of the customs and traditions of the people. Uh, always doing things. For example, the 1957 revolt that happened. One of the reasons it happened was the rifles contained, as per the rumors that the people had heard, the soldiers had heard, was that it contained pig and cow fat. Both are something that is unacceptable to the Hindus and Muslims. And so this was kind of the trigger point of the revolt. If the British had avoided this completely, the revolt might not have happened at that time. It could have happened at a later stage. So his uh, advice is that respect the customs and traditions of the people in the territory you conquer. You don't have to, for no reason, touch their customs and traditions, because if you do so, then you'll be hated. And remember his advice: be feared or be loved. You can be both if that's possible, but don't be hated. This was Machiavelli. So this is his legacy, as you can see: secularization of politics, which is separating politics from a religion; autonomy of politics, which is that politics has to be judged by its own criteria, meaning that if let's say somebody has come to power and if they are able to deliver a national interest, if they are able to bring stability, if they are able to bring order in the country, in the society, then they are successful. It doesn't matter if they followed ethical ways or not. And a father of political realism. And this was basically Machiavelli. I understand the video has gotten very long. This I'm just new to content making and I hope to improve on it. So if you found it helpful, please consider subscribing. Thank you.